Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at the themes of grace and judgment. We find those in Numbers chapter 11 in our continuing study of the book of Numbers. When we left off, the Israelites had been leaving Sinai, departing, and they'd come to the wilderness of Paran. And we're going to see them eventually coming up to Kadesh Barnea. They're on their way. This is one of the stops in the way. And we read in chapter 11, verse 1, "Now the people became like those who complain of adversity in the hearing of the Lord." Bad things. Ra is just the basic word for evil or bad stuff. Not moral evil, but they're complaining of adversity, hard times, in the hearing of the Lord. And when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some of the outskirts of the camp. It's a dangerous thing to tempt the Lord. So his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord. Now, that term anger, it's the regular word for anger, but it actually has the idea of, you can almost hear the snorting of somebody's nostrils. It's a very colorful word. And his anger was kindled. The people, therefore, cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died out. So the name of that place was called Taberah, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. It was called the place of burning because the fire of the Lord burned among them. The rabble who were among them had, and underscore this, they had greedy desires. That's going to be the big idea in this chapter. That's the big sin that's come to the forefront here. The rabble who were among them had greedy desires, and also the sons of Israel wept again and said, "Who will give us meat to eat?" Remember, they're eating. It's not that they're going hungry. They're eating manna every day. "But who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we used to eat free in Egypt, and the cucumbers and the melons and the leeks and the onions and the garlics. There was this little Egyptian restaurant there. But now our appetite is gone. There's nothing at all to look at except this manna." They're being fed for free in the desert, miraculously, and they're complaining because their diet is sort of the same. Now we're told, now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance was like that of bdellium. So coriander seed, it was tasty and maybe a bit crunchy. Now the manna was like coriander seed, and its appearance was like that of bdellium. The people would go about and gather it and grind it between two millstones, or beat it in the mortar, and boil it in the pot, and make cakes with it, and the taste was like the taste of cakes baked with oil. In other words, it was tasty. It was like dessert, 24/7. When the dew fell on the camp at night, the manna would fall with it. And so here we have the people complaining. And now Moses begins to complain, not about the manna, but about the people, about their unbelief, and he's complaining to God. Verse 10, "Now Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, each man in the doorway of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was kindled greatly. And Moses, he was displeased. So Moses said to the Lord, 'Why have you been so hard on your servant? And why have I not found favor in your sight that you've laid the burden of all this people on me? Was it I who conceived all these people? Was it I who brought them forth, that you should say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries an infant to the land which you swore to their fathers? Where am I to get meat?'" They're saying they want meat to eat. They want a dietary supplement. "Where am I to get meat to eat for all this people? They weep before me, saying, 'Give us meat that we may eat.' And I alone am not able to carry all this people because it's too burdensome for me." Of course it's too burdensome for Moses, because the Lord is the one who's carrying them through the wilderness. And he goes on to say, "So if you're going to deal thus with me, please kill me at once." That's rather a dumb prayer. "Please kill me at once if I found favor in your sight, and do not let me see my wretchedness." So Moses complains, and the Lord calls for leaders, because really the issue that Moses is facing is too great for him to bear. And so there's going to be a delegation of authority. In verse 16, the Lord therefore said to Moses, "Gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and their officers, and bring them to the tent of meeting, and let them take their stand there with you. Then I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take of the Spirit who is upon you, and will place him upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you will not bear it all alone. So there's going to be a spreading forth of the Spirit of God upon these 70. And he's called for leaders, and the sort of the climactic, central, pivotal point of this whole chapter, God's going to promise both grace and judgment to them. In verse 18, he says, say to the people, consecrate for yourselves for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you've wept in the ears of the Lord, saying, oh, that someone would give us meat to eat, for we were well off in Egypt. Therefore, the Lord's going to give you meat, and you're going to eat. You shall eat not 1 day, nor 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10 days, nor 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out of your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you. You're going to be sick of meat, because you've rejected the Lord who's among you, and have wept before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? But Moses said, the people among whom I am, there's 600,000 on foot. That's just the men. Yet you have said, I'm going to give them meat so they should eat for a whole month. Moses, where am I supposed to get that? Should flocks and herds be slaughtered for them, or be sufficient for them, or should all the fish of the sea be gathered together for them to be sufficient? Where could you possibly get meat for everyone here? And Moses himself has ignored the fact that God is sovereign, that he's the miracle-making God. The Lord said to Moses, is the Lord's power limited? Now you shall see whether my word will come true for you or not. And so, just as he promised, he's going to give. But before he gives, remember how the Lord had called for leaders? We're going to see the Spirit given to the leaders. So we go leaders, and back in verses 16 through 17, and again the Spirit now is given to those same leaders in verses 24 and 25. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and he took of the Spirit who was upon him and placed him upon the 70 elders. And when the Spirit rested upon them, they prophesied. Now this was only a one-time event. It says, but they did not do it again. But the Spirit comes, and to show that that Spirit is there, they prophesy. They speak the Word of God. And again, notice how there had been a complaint of Moses. Again, there's going to be a complaint. But this time it's going to be Joshua who's complaining about two of the prophets who sort of missed the tally. There were 2 men who had remained in the camp. 2 of those 70. And the name of one was Eldad, and the name of the other was Medad. And the Spirit rested upon them. Now, they were among those who'd been registered, but they hadn't gone out of the tent. Out to the tent. They hadn't gone out to be in the right place. And they prophesied in the camp. Now a young man ran and told Moses and said, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. And Joshua, the son of Nun, he's sort of he's Moses' right-hand man. He's the servant of Moses. He's going to be eventually the leader. And Joshua says, that's not right. They're doing it in the camp. They're not doing it out here in the right place at the right time. They miss, so they should be penalized. And so he says, Moses, my Lord, restrain them. Stop them from doing that. And Moses said to him, are you jealous for my sake? Would that all the Lord's people were prophets. The Lord would put his Spirit upon them. And the prayer of Moses, the wish of Moses here, will eventually be answered. It will be echoed later on by the prophet Joel. In Joel chapter 2, verse 28, Joel will prophesy, and will come about after this, that I will pour out my Spirit on all mankind. And your sons and daughters will prophesy, your old men will dream dreams, your young men will see visions, and even upon male and female servants, not just the men, not just the elders, not just the VIPs, upon male and female, even slaves, I'll pour out my Spirit in those days. And what Joel prophesied, God brought about in Acts chapter 2, when God's Spirit came upon not just men, not just the elders, not just the apostles, but upon all of his gathered people. And he's still doing it today. I'm not saying everybody's prophesying today, because remember back in Moses' day, it only happened once. But God's Spirit still comes upon all of his people. Now, finally, we had the complaint of Joshua about the 2 prophets, and now we see the epilogue, just like we started with the prologue, where there was a complaint of the people about what they ate. and a promise of the judgment of God. And now there's grace, God's gift, but also we're going to see judgment from the hand of the Lord. So in Numbers chapter 11, verse 31, now there went forth a wind from the Lord. Remember wind? That's the same word for spirit, ruach. A wind from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea, and let them fall beside the camp about a day's journey on this side and a day's journey on the other side. They were just birds every which way, as far as you could walk, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits deep on the surface of the ground. They were actually covered in quail. They were hip deep in birds. And the people spent all day and night and the next day and gathered the quail, and he who gathered the least gathered 10 homers. That was a lot. And they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. And while the meat was still between their teeth, they were gorging themselves on this. Before it was chewed, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very severe plague. Grace, but also judgment. So the name of that place was called Kibroth Hata'avah, because they kabrod, that's the kabroth part, they buried the people who had been greedy, who had been avah, so they named it the burial of the greedy. Now this brings up the question, why is greed, remember this chapter opened with greed and it closes with greed, why is greed such a terrible sin in the eyes of God? The answer, I think, is seen in Colossians chapter 3, verse 5, where Paul says, therefore consider the members of your earthly body as dead to immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and greed, which amounts to idolatry. You see, when we are greedy, we are making something else God instead of God. We are setting up an idol, and God will not tolerate idol worship on the part of his people. Don't go there. Instead, give your heart to him, and greed will dissipate. Make God enough, and he will be enough in your life.